So you'll hear a lot of authors say they just sit down and write anything they can think of just to fill up the pages, and then they'll go back. I don't do that. I go back, I reread, I tinker, I change, so that by the time I am done with the book, I'm pretty much done with the book.
Good evening and welcome to Writers Unplugged, and how special it is to be able to be in person for an author event. So this series started to support Cleveland Reads. Cleveland Reads is an initiative that Mayor Bibb has challenged Clevelanders to read 1 million books or 10 million minutes this year. So I wanted to create something so that it was a conversation between a writer and a librarian, as if you're eavesdropping on them in a coffee shop. And so my name is Jumba. I'm a librarian at Cleveland Public Library. I'm in the popular department at the main library, so pinch myself every day that I get to work in a space that is that beautiful. And so one of my favorite things as a librarian, besides reading, right, that's kind of a given, is talking to the people who write what I read. So we're lucky to have Anastasia Hastings joining us this evening. So before we get started, a couple quick housekeeping things. If you want to know who else is visiting, go to clevelandreads.com/unplugged. Maxbacks Books, which is our wonderful indie bookstore, Melissa's waving, has copies of Anastasia's book for sale, as well as Kylie's and Casey Daniels.
And maybe some others.
Maybe some others, yes. So I want to give you a brief introduction. So Anastasia is the daughter of a Cleveland police detective and former head of security at the Cleveland Public Library.
How cool is that?
It's so cool. I'm waiting for that book to come out, right? So she talked about growing up as a kid, and she's actually gone out with her dad to look for stolen vehicles, right? I think we can all agree it's not really a surprise that she writes mystery novels. I think that's fair. But Anastasia Hastings is actually the pen name for this incredibly talented writer who, over a 30-year career, has written over 65 novels, a variety of genres. She has a gift for writing mysteries, and you may know her as Kylie Logan, who has written the Jazz Ramsey series, or Mimi Granger for the romantic mystery series Love is Murder. Or perhaps you met her, as I did, as Casey Daniels. So the Pepper Martin series that has a wonderful paranormal element. Dun, dun, dun. So no matter what name she uses, her books are a wonderful escape from the day-to-day stress as she creates these wonderful worlds and characters, from a cozy bookstore to the cemetery to our Cleveland neighborhoods. And her most recent series of Manners and Murder is set in Victorian England. So it's the first in the series, and that's what we'll spend time talking about today. So I want to thank you all for joining us. So we'll go ahead and get started. Why don't you give us a brief introduction, no spoilers, of this book?
All right. The book, as Jen said, is set in England in 1885. It opens with our heroine, whose name is Violet, and her Aunt Adelia. Auntie Adelia has announced that she's leaving town. Mm-hmm. She's going to the continent, don't you know? And she
with
has...
a guy, right?
Pardon me?
With a guy.
With a guy,
mm-hmm.
Yes, a paramour.
Mm-hmm.
But while she's gone, she wants Violet to do something for her. And what she reveals is that she is the writer, the mysterious, unknown writer of an advice column named Miss Hermione. They called them Agony Ants. Agony Ants, think of Ann Landers or Miss Manners. But Agony Ants have been around a really long time. The first Agony Ants were men, actually, Agony Uncles. And they started publishing these kinds of columns in the 1700s. Benjamin Franklin actually worked as an Agony Uncle for a while. Wow. I think his name was, he used the name Simon Good or something like that. Anyway, by the middle of the 19th century, most of them were Agony Ants, very popular. There were more publications available. They were available cheaper, so this became a huge thing to read. So Adelia reveals that she is Miss Hermione, the famous Agony Ant. and she wants Violet to take over the column while she's gone. The first letter Violet receives is from a woman in a small village. Her name is Ivy, and she's expecting the questions in Ivy's letters to be about, what do I serve at Sunday tea, or what's the most fashionable color this year? But what Ivy writes about is, dear Miss Hermione, I don't know what to do. I think someone's trying to kill me. So that's what launches us into the mystery.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you taught me what an agony aunt was, because writer Jane Green was just posting on Instagram about she's now an agony aunt.
Oh,
and
nice.
she has a Dear Jane column. So I was like, I'm in the know, thanks to you.
I know what that is.
I
I
didn't
think
know what
it's
that
a
was.
familiar term in England,
Well, that
but
would
not here.
That would explain Jane's affinity for it. So what made you decide to set your book during this time period, Victorian England?
Well, I like the time period. I've always liked Victorian things. And I think part of that might be due to my dad, too. He loved the Sherlock Holmes stories, so he introduced me to those. So, of course, when I think of mystery, historical mystery, that's what I think of. So that was a natural for me.
Absolutely. So I'm joined in conversation with Anastasia Hastings this evening, first book in the series of Manners and Murder. And as you were writing, you did such a wonderful job with the setting and with the etiquette that as I'm reading it, I'm waiting for Violet to kind of bump into Sherlock on the street.
It would be interesting,
know.
wouldn't it? It could happen.
That's good to know. But I thought you did a wonderful job. So you talk about things like seed cakes. Have you ever had a seed cake before?
I don't think I've ever had seed cake. It's, is it
It's like a bread.
poppy seed? Yeah.
I had to look it up, and that's the great thing about writing is that you end up learning stuff, and then you're incredibly charming at cocktail parties.
That's right.
Anybody
It's
who
like,
knows
pass the
cakes-
seed cake, darling.
Exactly, it's exactly right. And the same thing with the tea and how you serve it, because there's a proper way in which you serve tea. It's not just, kind of what I probably do, but then again, I'm not a lady of leisure.
I think a lot of what historical readers, does anyone here, you like reading historical stuff? I think a lot of what historical readers want, and correct me if I'm wrong, is not so much, we don't want lists of days and dates and what happened and what the Queen was doing. You can look in a history book for that.
Right.
I think what historical fiction readers are looking for is the atmosphere of that time. And so that's what you get when you start talking about etiquette and food and tea, of course.
Absolutely, and what they're wearing.
Sure.
Absolutely. So I think, to your point, I think it's a wonderful thing. It allows us to kind of travel in time, right? So none of us were around back then, but I feel like I was. I feel like I was walking through those streets, that I was getting on that coach with her, and the horses, and you could hear the patter of the hooves on the, it was wonderfully done.
Thank you.
So I'm hoping there'll be more in that series.
The second one comes out in January. It's called Of Hoaxes and Homicide.
Ooh, I love the alliteration. That's great. Perfect. Do people come to you for advice?
Oh, no. Oh, God. They know better than that. I tell them something totally wacky, so no.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about Violet, right? What she was doing before her aunt said, tag, you're it. You're going to step in and be dear Hermione.
Well, Violet has a half-sister named Sephora, who is much younger than Violet and pretty much a scatterbrain. And that results because Violet and Sephora were both raised by a father who worked for the Foreign Service. Okay. So they lived in places like India and China and far away places. When Violet was young, Papa thought she should experience these places and she should learn things. And so she is something of what they would have called a blue stocking, an intelligent, educated woman, probably more likely than a lot of them liked for speaking her mind. Sephora is the total opposite. Sephora has a different mother. Her mother was more interested in teaching Sephora to be a proper lady who would find the right kind of husband. So you have these two sisters who are very different from each other. they've been in London about a year and a half, 2 years, I think, when the book opens. And Violet keeps busy visiting museums, going to the reading room at the British Museum, exploring the city, learning the city, educating herself. Sephora hangs out with her friends and goes shopping. So, so Violet,
we all have friends like that, right? We know
Yes,
the person we
absolutely.
call when we want to go
she's
to the
an
museum.
airhead. So Violet has kept herself very busy, and it's pretty much, she would like to be a scholar, but that's not exactly an accepted thing for a woman. So she's just doing a lot of educating herself.
Absolutely. Was it important to you to write a strong female character, which is somewhat atypical for that time period?
Absolutely. Because, well, I'm not sure it was all that atypical. I don't think we give the Victorians enough credit for being as edgy as they were.
Okay.
But what I've seen, what I've heard from readers, I think Sephora is maybe more true to the female character at the time. And the readers I talk to don't like her because of that.
Really?
Yeah, she's too much of a milquetoast, you know?
Yes.
Too worried about fashion, too worried about what to do with her hair. And I don't think that's what readers, especially now, are looking for.
True, but I think it's nice when you are able to present two characters that had a very similar upbringing, right? Because the father was the constant, and they went in two totally different directions. Because Sephora traveled to India, she traveled
she lived there too.
to China, she traveled along with her sister, and one takes the route of adventure and learning, and the other one kind of takes the, I don't know, party route or
more social, more worried
social.
about the rules of society. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how your characters come to? Do they come fully formed, or how does that?
I don't think anybody comes fully formed. I think it's like everything else in a book. You know, you start building and then you think, oh, okay, and maybe she's interested in dinosaurs too. Or, you know, the more you get to know them, the more you learn about them. So I don't think anybody comes fully formed. I probably knew I wanted Sephora to be more of a flighty character.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
She's definitely flighty. And I knew I wanted Violet to be a stronger, more logical character because she's also going to be the detective. She's got to be able to think her way through a situation. But I think as you write, you uncover more things about them.
It's the only time I think where we can agree it's okay to hear voices in your head and have imaginary people nudge you in the direction that they want to go during the course of the story.
You know, for me anyway, writing is a little bit like watching a movie in my head.
Okay.
I watch them go through their paces and think, okay, that'll work, or no, that won't. Go back again and do it again the way I want you to. So,
yeah, to make sure it's authentic to who they are and how they would react in a particular situation.
Yes.
Perfect. One of the things that I think is really kind of interesting is we just talked about how different Sephora is from her sister Violet, but yet at the same time, they share something in common in terms of this kind of grit and determination. Like I think Sephora surprises herself, doesn't realize.
Yes, I think she does too. And will more in book 2.
Ooh. Yeah, so I'm so lucky. We're joined in conversation this evening with Anastasia Hastings of Manners and Murder. So it makes me think, is there like a proper etiquette to murder in the Victorian times?
Oh,
is it
like, probably was. There was to everything else.
Yeah, that's true. True. Very, very true. So one of the lines that I really liked, and I think one of the things that writing does so well is there are certain things that just transcend time, right? Because you're writing about people, and you do a wonderful job with characters that they're not flat. They're not one-dimensional. They're kind of like we are. We're not all good. We're not all bad. We're kind of complex at times. But there's a letter, because is it a spoiler to talk about?
Oh, no, you can talk about any old letter you want.
Okay, so she's comes across Ivy's diary. And so she's reading it, and at one point she says, I had the freedom to read the words in hushed tones. Giving voice to them made them feel more solid, more real.
I have no memory of that line, but it's a great line.
It is a great line. But it just makes me think there are a lot of times where we write things down, but it's not until we say them that we have a little bit more sense of ownership, right? Or a little bit more deliberate, or we say them out loud to somebody else to, feel seen and feel heard. So.
Absolutely.
And that transcends. It doesn't matter if it's Victorian times, doesn't matter if it's...
People are people.
People are people.
I don't think we're all that different.
I really don't think we are either. Although I had to pick up a bookmark that's on the table with Max Backs, right? Agatha Christie, very few of us are what we seem. Like, dun, 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 right?
Yep, great quote.
It is a terrific quote. And I think that's the magic of books, is that the writers do such a wonderful job of allowing us to kind of see inside the character's head, because you start to understand not just the who done it, but the why they done it, right? And I think that's what makes books so special.
And I think that's important too. If you just do who done it, like you said, it's too flat. We have to understand who's thinking, what are their motivations? What are they going to get out of this?
Right.
Somebody killed Ivy. Why?
Yes. And Ivy, before, when she's sending a letter to the agony aunt, has clippings with people, photos, and has circled particular people, circled their heads.
So Violet has her list of suspects before she even travels to this little town. Yes.
Yes, which I thought was really kind of clever. And, those of us who read mysteries, people in the room, I'm assuming, we get to be pretty good about being able to figure out what's going to happen. Not so. I thought I was committed to this person. Oh, that's despicable. And then, oh no, I kind of like them now. But this is the one. Oh no. So kind of keeps you guessing and twisting and.
Yes, we didn't actually come out and say it, but she gets this letter from Ivy that says, I think someone's trying to kill me. Ivy sends these clippings with people's faces circled. And Violet actually goes to this little village because she can't print this letter, certainly. But she thinks she can maybe talk to Ivy and offer some advice. And when she gets to the village, she walks smack dab into the middle of Ivy's funeral. So
yeah.
So she was right. Somebody was trying to kill him.
Yeah, because she didn't know that before she went. She was just going to meet with Ivy to have a conversation and kind of help her figure out how can she stay safe. Well, not quite.
Too late.
Too late, exactly. However, it is a wonderful set of circumstances that Violet finds herself in, and meeting people and trying to remain genuine and curious in these. I guess part of her story as to why she's there and how people can suss it out and some others don't. And all those classmate of Ivy's.
All those, well, she says she was a classmate. All those people whose names, whose faces were circled, are all at the funeral.
Correct.
Course. So that helps things along too.
Yeah, absolutely. You've written other genres. What makes you keep coming back to mysteries?
Mysteries are so much fun. I've always been a mystery reader, but it took me a long time to write mysteries. I actually started my writing career writing historical romance, and I've written contemporary romance. I've written one children's book. I've written some young adult books. The whole time I was doing all that, I was reading mysteries, but I talked myself out of writing them because you gotta be awful smart to write a mystery. I don't think I could do that. So I wasted a lot of time talking myself out of it. And then one day I sort of woke up and thought, well, you're not going to know if you can do it until you try to do it. And my first mystery was Dawn of the Dead, which is one of the Casey Daniels books.
Right. I think it's Lakeview, but that's just, I love the paranormal element to it.
And that series is set in Cleveland. The heroine works at a cemetery very much like Lakeview Cemetery, but not Lakeview Cemetery. And she solves mysteries for the ghosts in the cemetery. So that was a lot of fun. And it sort of fed my love of history too, because each ghost she deals with is from a different era, and I got to talk about different times in Cleveland history. So all good.
Absolutely. Can you share with us, I'm joining a conversation with Anastasia Hastings, writer of 65 books, one of which is the most recent of Manners and Murder. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Are you somebody who kind of outlines, or are you somebody who kind of flies by the seat of their pants?
I am an outliner.
Okay.
I'm sure you've talked to plenty of other authors who are what we call pantsters. Those who they do fly by the seat of their pants. They sit down every day. They don't know what's going to happen. They just start writing. I've tried that. It's frightening. I have to know what's going on. So I spend a lot of time before I start writing. I spend a lot of time outlining. I can sometimes spend 6 weeks outlining.
Okay.
And what I do is I just start by writing things down on the computer. It's stream of consciousness. Okay, I want to write a book about an agony aunt. Maybe the heroine's name is, and I'll go through all my ideas. Okay, Violet, I like Violet. And what could happen, and da-da-da-da. And I do that every day, all day for weeks, and finally get to the point where I can sort of break it down into chapters. Okay, that'd be a good ending for chapter 1. And okay, that could be chapter 2. I don't always know how something is going to happen.
Okay.
But I know where it needs to happen. Okay. And for me, that's a nice safety net, rather than just sitting down and going, oh, okay, let's see what we could do today. At least I know, especially with the mystery, it's got to make sense and it's got to wrap up at the end. So this is a nice way for me to work through it and get where I need to go.
As you are outlining and you start writing those scenes, does anything ever change?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not written in stone.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever changed my murderer. And I know you'll hear that from a lot of authors too. Oh, I never knew who did it till the end. Well, I usually know who did it. Yeah. But things can change if I come up with a better idea, or, oh, he's a terrible suspect. Why don't we make him a geophysicist instead? Whatever.
Right.
I'm open to that, sure.
Okay. I think that's terrific. I think, again, speaks to the magic of writing, is that as a reader, we're on the edge of our seat. But when you're writing it and you already know what the ending is going to be and who the murderer is, how you're able to do that without tipping your hand to us as readers.
And that's always a scary prospect, because especially as you get toward the end of the book, where everything does need to wrap up and make sense.
Yes.
And I find myself saying, ooh, did I say too much? Ooh, they're all going to know. Oh, I shouldn't. And then every once in a while I have to remind myself, but it's the end of the book. It's time to do that. So
very cool.
It's a tightrope.
It is. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to write a series?
It's tough to write a series. Because you have to keep the readers coming back, number one, obviously. The Casey Daniels books we talked about, the Pepper Martin mysteries set at the cemetery, there are 10 books in that series. So each book stands alone, each mystery stands alone, but you have to keep it fresh for all the people who've read the first 6 books. Book number 7 better offer them something new, or they're not going to come back. The other trick with a series is, for instance, the second book in the Violet series comes out in January. So when you start telling that story, you have to catch up people who may not have read the first book.
Who wouldn't do that?
Well,
I'm just kidding.
Everyone in America, I hope, and beyond.
Yes.
But you can't say too much, because you don't want to give too much away, or they never will read the first book. So again, there's that tightrope again. You're walking that fine line, what to tell, what not to tell, how much do you give away, how much do you just sort of refer to, oh, the ugliness of last summer, you know.
Fair. Do you have, you have an outline for every book. Do you have like an overall outline so that you know how many books you want in the series, or how many mysteries within that series, so that you arc the characters? If only. If only,
because the reality of publishing is you sign a contract, and you may sign a contract for 2 books or 3 books.
Okay.
But wouldn't it be great to sit back and say, oh, I'd like to do 10 books in this series, but you don't know if you ever will. And that all depends on sales. So again, Everyone in America.
Max Specs. You want more? Terrific. So I'm joined by Anastasia Hastings. Let's talk a little bit about how do you know when a series is done, and aside from you've signed a 3-book or a 2-book contract, how do you know when it's time to, for example, Pepper?
Oh, I'd happily write
Okay,
more
good.
of those. She's a lot of fun.
She is.
She would be fun to write. Sometimes I've got a series you mentioned, the Love is Murder mysteries, which are set in what is basically Peninsula, Ohio, although I call it Tinker's Creek. And it's set at a romance bookstore. Pardon me?
Is it a nod to Annie? Oh, never mind.
Okay. I missed whatever we were getting
No,
at
that's right.
there,
It was
but-
the wrong thing to say.
Okay. I knew that one was sort of wrapped up.
Okay.
I wrapped up there's 2 books only in that series, and obviously both mysteries wrapped up, but the personal parts of the heroine's life wrapped up too. So that was like, okay, we're done here.
Gotcha.
So sometimes you know, and you're good with it, and sometimes you're itching to write more, and it doesn't happen.
Would you ever do a crossover and take?
Give me a for instance.
I'm thinking like you have your Dear Hermione series, and she happens to be at the funeral of Ivy and is in a graveyard, and maybe there's a ghost that comes that wants. No,
Well,
I'm just wondering if it would ever.
it depends, because as cool as that idea is, again, you've got a publisher who might say, oh, these aren't paranormal mysteries.
Right.
So no ghosts. So it depends.
Is this why you have different pen names, so that
Yes.
when people pick up a Casey Daniels book, they know it's going to be
Exactly.
paranormal. When they pick up Kylie Logan, they know
Right.
it's going to be a Jazz
Right.
Ramsey. Okay, that makes
And that's
sense.
how I became Kylie, actually. I was writing the Pepper Martin paranormal mysteries, and I had an idea for a mystery series based around antique buttons. Anybody here like old buttons? Buttons are cool.
Yeah.
They are the coolest things. They are little pieces of art, and the history is amazing. Anyway, I had an idea for a series based on old buttons, but there were no ghosts in that book.
Okay.
It was the same publisher who was doing the ghost books.
Okay.
So they asked for another name, so that if people picked up this book and it said Casey Daniels on it, they would be expecting ghosts. So that's how I became Kylie Logan.
Okay. How many different pen names?
I don't know, maybe 12. I don't know. It's
I never know what to call you.
all my pen names, all my pen names and all my books are on my website.
Yes.
And the website is I have to read it. mystery-book-series.com. And that
There's
website
bookmarks
is
out
on
the
these,
table. So yeah.
these bookmarks. So grab a bookmark.
Yep.
And all my names and all my books and everything from in the back of forever is on there.
That's terrific.
Every once in a while I have to look.
Yeah. That's okay. But like, I mean, very few people do I know who have written 65 books. So that's a huge accomplishment. And then to kind of keep them all straight with the characters and the settings,
Yeah.
knowing that they're series versus like a one-off. Like, yes, they can stand alone. So if somebody's new and picks one up, then they're going to do what most people do and go, oh my gosh, I have to read from the beginning. And there's a thing, binge watching, we call it binge reading as librarians. So we go back and read the entire backlist.
Yeah.
So
Important stuff.
absolutely, it's important stuff. So this is an opportunity to kind of turn it over to our lovely audience and see if they have any questions. And I'll repeat the question just because we're recording for the podcast. So for people who weren't able to make it tonight. Anybody have any questions?
Oh, just for those of us that have yet to read your work, your influences and what got you into writing mysteries.
The gentleman is asking who influenced you and got you into writing.
Well, like I said, I've always enjoyed reading mysteries, and that's my dad's fault because of Sherlock Holmes. And then I had friends, of course, over the years who introduced me to Agatha Christie and, you know, all the old the golden age.
Yes, the golden
writers.
age of mysteries. Right.
So it's simply because I like mysteries. I think mysteries are fun. There's a nice twisty turny plot. There's those
Yes.
clues. There's the red herrings.
Yes.
There's misdirecting people, which is always fun.
As a reader.
So you get to be a little bit of a magician as well as a writer.
Well done. Anybody else have any questions?
What's a typical day like for you?
What is a typical day like for you?
Well, I'm a full-time writer, so I usually don't write on weekends unless there is a deadline breathing down my neck. But Monday through Friday, I write all day. A little trick I have, and I give this to you for whatever it works for. I set a clock for 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, all I can do is write. And then I have 15 minutes to do whatever I want, which is usually, unload the dishwasher or walk the dogs or throw clothes in the wash. But it's great because you feel like you're getting a reward, but you're also getting that 45 minutes of straight work in. This also works when you're cleaning closets or preparing your taxes or whatever else.
I think that's fair. I think that's how sometimes I approach reading, is that I will read until I get to a certain chapter and then I have to fold the laundry.
Right.
But then I've discovered audiobooks, so I figure
So you
I
can
can
both-
listen and do.
Yes.
I still prefer a book. Can we talk a little bit about the cover? People are curious how much influence you have on,
Oh, very little.
but they nail it.
They
nailed
did.
it.
They did a good job. They will always send me the artwork once the first sketches are done. They'll say, well, here's the cover. What do you think? But, what do you think?
It's like the volunteered kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great. And this one is. This is a good cover. I like the colors. I like everything about it.
Coordinates well with her outfit.
It
For
does.
those of you who are listening.
Or does the outfit coordinate with the book cover?
Yes.
One of the two, yes. So yes, I do get a look at the cover. I get a look at the back cover copy, and that in general may need some tweaking now and again, and they're good about that. If there was something terribly off, they'd change it, but they got good people doing good work.
They do. So I'm talking to Anastasia Hastings. Talk a little bit about your audiobooks. How you...
Oh, audio. What fun.
Yes.
Of Manners and Murder is
I found
out
myself
on
speaking
audio.
with a British accent.
Oh,
'Cause
and
I was
she's not
listening.
British. It's fabulous. I was sent 5 audition tapes. I got to audition 5 different actresses who were going to read the book. And I tell you, my hat's off to anybody who can read a book. Can you, out loud? That's got to be a tremendous amount of work. But I would listen to them again and again, and one of them sounded a little too cranky to me, and and you just kind of eliminate. But the woman they chose, I chose, and then they went along with it. We were able to get her. She's fabulous.
She did a great
really
job.
good.
Oh, people were cutting me off in traffic, and I was telling them with my proper British accent. I was just immersed in the story.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did a wonderful
She did
job.
a great job.
You said it takes you about 6 weeks to outline a book. Approximately how long does it take you to write a book?
Depends when my next deadline is. Because that old saying,
Yes.
you work to fill up the time.
Correct.
If I had 6 months, I'm comfortable. I don't always have 6 months.
Wow.
4 to 6 usually will do it.
Wow. Do you feel bad that we as readers read it in a lot less than 4 to 6 months?
You're going to read it in a night and say, when's the next one coming
It's
out?
exactly right.
But actually, that's the best comment. That's the best compliment in the world.
Okay, good, because there were 2 evenings where I was like, I'm having cereal for dinner because I'm not taking the time. Yes, the audio's great, but I just didn't want to put it down. I was completely immersed in that world.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
What does the editing process look like for you? How clean is your book writing in the process versus how many times do you have rewrites or editing? Like, what does that timeline look like?
So the gentleman in the back is asking about your editing process, what that looks like, how clean is that first go, and then how does that evolve?
You'll get as many answers to that as authors you ask that to. For me, when I'm done, I'm pretty much done because I'm pretty slow. So you'll hear a lot of authors say they just sit down and write anything they can think of just to fill up the pages, and then they'll go back. I don't do that. I go back, I reread, I tinker, I change, so that by the time I am done with the book, I'm pretty much done with the book. Now, what happens after that is I send it to an editor, my editor at the publishing house. The editor will send back notes, requests, and most editors are really good. I've worked with a few picky ones in my day, but most of them are very good. And most of them will say, you know, I would suggest thus and such, but it's your book. Do what you think is right. Okay. So you make those changes. You send it back to the editor. It then goes to a person called a copy editor. And a copy editor is theoretically the person who's supposed to say, you know, read it and think, okay, the heroine has brown eyes on page 4. Oh, look, on page 79, she has blue eyes. So they're supposed to watch out for that, for grammar, for punctuation. So I get to see it again after that and make any changes I need to make. And then it goes away again, and I see it after the book is typeset.
Okay.
And at that point, I'm only looking for typos because publishers are smart. If you change too much after it's been typeset, you pay to have it retypeset.
Oh,
because let's face it, we'd all mess with our words. We'd all start second guessing things. We'd all start changing things. So that's the last time I get to see it. And at that point, I'm only looking for really horrible errors.
So it's like that expression that art is never really done, it's simply abandoned.
Well, it has to be.
But I mean,
it's got to be
because
published.
you're going to constantly want to tweak or constantly want to change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm joined by Anastasia Hastings this evening of Murders. Why do I trip up on this? Of Manners and Murder. It's a good thing the next book is alliterative as well.
Hoaxes and
I'm in trouble for that one. Is there anything that I haven't asked or our lovely audience?
Do you write short stories as well as novels?
Do you want to repeat that?
Gentleman is asking whether or not you write short stories in addition to novels.
I've tried twice. I'm terrible at it because it's short. We were at a funeral once, and we were actually doing a toast to the departed, and someone asked me to say a few words, and I said, I need 80,000 words. I can't say a few words. So short stories to me are a very different talent than novel writing. You have to be so succinct, and at least I haven't figured that out yet. I'd like to. It'd be interesting. I know some great short story writers.
I used to write radio commercials, and we used to always tell the client, if I had more time, it would be shorter. And not many people understood that, but it is so hard to be succinct and to be brief and still generate that call to action, that response to connect emotionally, to compel somebody to do something.
Yeah, that's a real talent, and I have not found it yet.
I think it's there. But I also think, like, why? Because we've got all these amazing novels. So we're very,
Maybe
very
I'll
lucky.
try again someday.
Absolutely. Yes?
So you talked about breaking up your chapters and having a resolution. I mean, is that almost like a short story at a time? And also, is your outlining process one of the reasons why you're able to, do you think that you can, write it in one go and kind of be done with it quicker?
It's a great question from the gentleman in the back wanting to know when you talked about writing chapters. He is making an argument that perhaps that should be considered a bit of a short story. And is that where your outline comes in, that you're able to write a continuous start to finish?
Yes, to both those things. To me, knowing where a chapter is going Knowing where it's going to end is what's important to me, because you don't know when you're there unless you know where you're going. So it's nice to know, okay, I only need to get her to the funeral. I need to get her to the churchyard to look at the graves, whatever. So that does help. And yes, I think because I outline, that saves me a lot of time at the other end, because I know what's going to happen. And like I said, you're going to hear from other authors that they don't, but then their rewriting is a lot more, it takes a lot more time than I'm doing.
Anybody else have any questions? What's it like writing in this book? You do it from two different characters, two different points of view.
I was so mad at myself for thinking of that. I'm not even sure where that came from. I happened to be talking to my editor on the phone. And we're just talking, in general, oh, this is when we'd like to get it out, and this is your deadline, and blah, 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 blah. And this voice came from on high and said to me, do Sephora's point of view too. Right. And it sort of fell out of my mouth, and by then it was too late to take it back. And the editor said, oh, wow, what a great idea. It made it a lot harder. But I think it also made for a better book.
I was going to say, from a reader's perspective, anytime you have two different characters experiencing something similar and you hear two different points of view, it's always enriching.
And I really got myself in trouble with the second book, because Violet is out in the country conducting her investigation. Sephora is back in London, also conducting part of the investigation. So I got to the point of, okay, who knows what? So it gets tricky, yes.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, this series was created to support Cleveland Reads, to improve literacy levels in Cleveland, for people to discover or rediscover the joy of reading. Can you talk about why literacy is so important to you?
I can tell you a story that has to do with Cleveland Public Library, because I grew up in Cleveland, and I remember the day I went to the Fleet branch, which may not be there anymore, and I got my first library card. It is burned in my mind. It was pink, and it was a little rectangle of cardboard or stiff paper. And my dad took me to get my library card. And I remember coming home, and I was so excited to show it to my mom. Look what I got, look what I got. And the very first book I took out was Horton Hatches the Egg.
Because an elephant is faithful, 100%.
That's right, and I still... So I think the literacy thing has always been important to me, and I think I knew that when I was, I don't know how old you had to be, 6 maybe at the time, 5, I don't know. Yeah. And how big of a deal it was to finally be let into the adult room at the library rather than the children's room. So I think I just always knew this is cool stuff. This is how we learn things. And like you said, it can be time travel, it can be educational. It's the best thing we can do.
I think so. And I think it's great for kids growing up today, because I did the same thing. You're going from the children's to the adult, and now there's a whole proliferation of young adult writing.
And good young adult writing.
Very good, to the point where, according to a research study, which I just looked up, of the people that read young adult, 55% of them are adults.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's part of it because we didn't have, those of us of a certain age,
right,
didn't have that growing
up.
And there's something really wonderful about the books that are written today.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Lots of good stuff out there.
Good. So I'm joined by Anastasia Hastings. We're going to move to the final 5 questions. Which of your characters, you can pick any series, or you can just pick this book, would you take a road trip with?
Oh my gosh, not Pepper. Oh my, she would be a total pain, although she'd be fun. Violet would be fun. She'd notice a lot of things along the way.
Yeah.
So maybe we'd take Pepper, but we'd leave her somewhere, and we'd continue on.
Okay. Your favorite childhood book? Is it Horton Hatches?
Well,
because that was the
Hatches
first one you got?
Because I remember it. but it depends on what we consider childhood. If high school figures into there,
Sure.
and finally going into that adult room, there is a historical novel called The Game of Kings by Dorothy Dennett. It's set in Scotland in the 1500s, and it's fabulous. So that has to be on my list.
Okay.
And Sherlock Holmes, of course.
Absolutely. I did ask you if you've ever made seed cake. Do you think you will?
No, I'm not much of a baker, so I don't think I could do justice to seed cakes. It wouldn't taste like Bunty's.
No. What's the best thing about being a writer?
Oh, wow. I used to say you don't ever have to wear pantyhose to work, but nobody wears pantyhose anymore, so that doesn't really count. I guess just being your own boss
Okay.
and getting to live inside your head so much and having this fabulous excuse when you just go outside and you just sit on the front porch going,
Research.
I mean, you're thinking, you're always thinking. Now, that's also the flip side of that, is it's also a bad thing because that book and those characters don't leave. So when you're at the 4th of July picnic, you're still thinking, oh, but he could say such and such, and she could come back with so-and-so. So good and bad to everything.
Absolutely. If you weren't a writer, what career would you like?
Ooh, it should become as no surprise that it would have something to do with research. I'd love to be an archivist or a genealogist.
That would be
I do
wonderful.
family history for my own family, so that would be fun.
So I want to say thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you to our tech team for making sure we're running smoothly. And then thanks to all of you who are listening to Writers Unplugged for sharing your love of reading with each other. I'm Jen Jumba with the Cleveland Public Library. Happy reading.